You ever think about how, like, 100 years ago, most people didn't live in cities?
Yeah, it's wild.
I mean, seriously, only about, what, 1 in 10 people were city dwellers back then?
Now it's half the planet. Crazy when you think about it.
It's like this huge shift in, how we live, how society's organized.
Absolutely. The defining demographic trend of the last century, no doubt.
So it really makes you wonder, what does that tell us about the world today? Like,
Yeah.
how does that change everything else?
Well, I think to understand pretty much anything these days, global economics, culture, you name it, you got to understand cities.
Makes sense.
It's not just more people living closer together. It's a whole different way of being.
Totally. And that's what we're diving into today. A listener suggested we take a look at this piece called The Challenge of the Cities.
Oh, interesting.
It's by Roger S. Greenway.
Okay, I'm not familiar with them.
So Greenway was a professor of, get this, world missiology.
World missiology.
Yeah, basically the study of religious missions across the globe.
Yeah.
And he spent decades doing mission work himself.
So he's coming at this from a faith-based perspective.
Exactly. But even if you're not, coming from that same place, his observations about why cities matter are really insightful.
I can see that. His background probably gives him a unique perspective on how these massive urban centers actually function.
Right. So Greenway's main argument is that cities are the new frontier.
The new frontier, huh? Not exactly what comes to mind when I think of cities.
Yeah, it's not like, uncharted wilderness. But he means it in terms of their size, the influence they have, the incredible diversity.
And the needs, right? Like the huge scale of human needs in cities.
Exactly. And he has this line, as cities go, the world goes. Pretty bold statement.
It is bold, but I can see where he's coming from. I mean, think about it. Politics, economics, technology, even culture, it all seems to revolve around cities.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about this whole scale of urban growth thing. Greenway throws out some numbers that are honestly kind of mind-blowing.
Okay, hit me with them.
So in 1950, there were only 2 cities on the entire planet with over 8 million people, New York and London.
Makes sense.
By the year 2000, there were 25 megacities like that.
Wow. So more than 10 times the number in just 50 years.
And Greenway was writing this back in the early 2000s, projecting 33 megacities by 2015, with almost 20 of those in Asia alone.
It's crazy how much of the growth is concentrated in Asia.
It really is. And remember, these are just the populations within the city limits themselves.
Right, the official boundaries?
The actual metropolitan areas with all the suburbs and sprawl are even bigger.
Way bigger in a lot of cases.
Greenway actually lists some of the cities projected to be megacities by 2015. Just listen to these names: Dhaka, Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Seoul, Bangkok.
Okay, those are some heavy hitters.
Mumbai, New Delhi, Calcutta, Jakarta, Karachi, Manila.
Wow, the list just keeps going.
It does. Lagos, Mexico City, Kinshasa, New York, Los Angeles.
And those are just the ones we've heard of in the West, probably.
Right. Cairo, Paris, Tehran, Moscow, Istanbul, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Lima.
It just gives you a sense of how global this is.
Totally. And when you think about what's fueling this massive growth, there are 2 main drivers. Greenway talks about rural-urban migration,
People moving from the countryside to the city, classic story.
which accounts for about half of the growth. And then there's what he calls internal growth, more people being born in cities than dying.
So the cities are kind of growing from within as well.
Exactly. And that migration piece is just on a staggering scale. Greenway says over 1 billion people moved to cities in just the 2 decades before he was writing.
That's like the biggest movement of people in human history.
It is. So why are so many people leaving rural areas and heading to cities?
Well, on the one hand, you have these push factors, right? Like rural populations growing, putting pressure on land and jobs. Agriculture can only support so many people.
Yeah, if your family's been farming for generations, but there just isn't enough land to go around.
Exactly. And then cities have all these pull factors: more jobs, better pay, education, healthcare.
The excitement, the opportunity, that whole idea that the city is where things are happening.
It's a powerful narrative. People leave everything behind, hoping for a better future.
Right. But Greenway is also honest about the fact that it's not always easy. A lot of people who move to cities face some pretty harsh realities.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of folks arrive without the skills they need for urban jobs.
And then there's the cost of living. Housing in cities can be incredibly expensive.
For sure.
Yeah.
Which is why you see so many people ending up in these informal settlements, the squatter communities.
And the conditions in those settlements can be really rough, right? Greenway talks about lack of clean water, sewage systems, electricity,
Basic stuff that most of us take for granted.
and they often don't have legal rights to the land, so they're constantly at risk of being evicted.
It's a precarious existence.
It is. And even if you manage to find work, the conditions can be brutal. Long hours, low pay, crazy commutes.
Yeah, Greenway talks about whole families working just to survive. Parents, kids, grandparents.
It puts a huge strain on families and communities.
For sure. But it's interesting because despite all that hardship, Greenway says there's still this underlying sense of optimism among a lot of these new urban dwellers, especially about their children's futures.
It's like this belief that things will get better for the next generation, even if their own lives are really difficult.
It's that hope that keeps people going, you know, that maybe their kids will have opportunities they never had.
I guess it's a testament to the human spirit, right? That even in the face of such adversity, people still hold on to hope.
It really is. Now, Greenway also has this fascinating idea about how all this migration actually impacts people's openness to new ideas.
Oh, interesting. What does he say?
Well, he suggests that when people are uprooted, when their lives are turned upside down, they become more open to new ways of thinking, new beliefs even.
Huh. Like they're searching for something to make sense of it all.
Exactly. The old ways of life don't work anymore, so they're looking for something new to fill that void.
That makes a lot of sense.
And he talks specifically about his experience working in Mexico City, where he noticed that people who had moved there relatively recently were more open to hearing about Christianity.
So it's not just a theory. He's seen it firsthand.
Right. And he describes how they'd go door to door, talking to people, offering to pray for them, starting Bible studies in homes.
Very personal grassroots stuff.
Yeah. And these little groups, these cells and house churches, would often grow into bigger congregations.
Interesting. So it's like this massive migration is creating all these opportunities for people to encounter new beliefs.
Which leads to this pretty mind-blowing idea that maybe this whole urban shift is part of a larger, divine plan.
Wow, like it's bringing people from all over the world together in these urban centers where they can be reached more easily.
Exactly. It kind of reframes the challenges of urbanization into strategic opportunities for, well, in this case, spreading the Christian message.
Okay, so we've talked about the scale of urban growth and this idea of openness to new ideas. But Greenway also gets into some very real challenges that come with trying to work in urban environments.
Right, because it's not all sunshine and roses.
Definitely not. And I think a lot of these challenges apply whether you're talking about religious missions or just trying to understand cities in general.
Absolutely. They're inherent to urban life.
So first up, poverty.
Uh-huh.
Greenway points out that in many cities, a huge percentage of the population lives in poverty. He mentions numbers like 30 to 50%.
Yeah. That level of inequality creates huge problems.
And he argues that you can't just focus on, spiritual needs. You have to address the practical needs too. Housing, healthcare, jobs.
You can't ignore those basic necessities.
Exactly. Okay, his second point is diversity. Cities are just incredibly diverse places.
Racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic. You name it, cities have it.
And he says that diversity has a big impact on how you approach any kind of work or engagement in cities.
For sure. You can't just use a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to be sensitive to all these different cultures and backgrounds.
Right. Then he talked about religious pluralism.
Yeah.
Unlike rural areas, which are often more religiously homogenous.
Yeah, where everyone kind of believes the same things.
Cities have people of all different faiths
Mm-hmm.
and also people with no religious beliefs at all.
And that means you have to be ready to engage with people from all these different perspectives, right?
Absolutely. Respectfully and thoughtfully.
Not just trying to, convert everyone to your own way of thinking.
Okay, so we've got poverty, diversity, religious pluralism. What else?
Well, Greenway talks about this thing he calls anti-urban attitudes.
Anti-urban attitude.
Yeah, like this historical tendency to prioritize rural areas over cities, even though most people live in cities now.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, maybe it's this idea that cities are chaotic, dangerous, full of problems.
Yeah, all the noise, the traffic, the pollution.
It can be overwhelming.
But Greenway argues that we can't afford to ignore cities, even if they are challenging.
Right. They're where the people are and where the needs are.
And his final practical challenge is the cost. Just the sheer expense of doing anything in a city.
Yeah, everything is more expensive in cities. Housing, property, labor costs.
It's a huge hurdle for any organization or individual trying to work in an urban environment.
Definitely. And Greenway worries that this financial pressure might lead some to focus on less expensive rural work, even if the need is greater in cities.
That's a good point. Okay, so now Greenway shifts gears and starts talking about what he calls biblical perspectives on cities.
Interesting. What does he say?
Well, he starts by emphasizing that the gospel is for everyone in cities, no matter their background.
Okay, so he's not saying cities are only for Christians.
Right, he's saying the message is universal. One gospel, from the one God, through the one Savior, she says.
It's meant to be shared with everyone, regardless of where they come from.
Exactly. Then he makes this distinction between felt needs and ultimate needs.
Okay, what does he mean by that?
So felt needs are things like, basic necessities, food, shelter, healthcare.
The stuff people need to survive.
Right. But ultimate needs are spiritual needs, things like repentance, conversion, reconciliation with God.
So the deeper existential stuff.
Yeah. And he argues that while it's important to address those felt needs, we can't neglect the ultimate needs.
Interesting. So he's saying you have to care for both the physical and the spiritual.
Exactly. He also believes there's a biblical mandate to reach cities with this message.
Okay, what's his basis for that?
Well, he points to the story of Jonah being called to preach to the city of Nineveh.
Ah, right.
And then in the New Testament, he talks about how the Apostle Paul focused his ministry on establishing churches in major urban centers.
Places like Corinth, Ephesus, Philippi.
Exactly. Those were the hubs of the Roman Empire. And Greenway argues that local churches and cities should be like, lighthouses and showcases
Showcases of what?
of their faith, of their beliefs. And he sees them as agents of positive change within the city.
So they're not just supposed to be inward focused. They're meant to have an impact on the wider community.
Right. He also uses this metaphor of cities as battlefields.
Battlefields.
Yeah, in a spiritual sense. He's
Yeah.
talking about this idea of like a spiritual war going on. And cities are where a lot of that conflict plays out.
I guess because there's so much, good and bad happening in cities.
Yeah. And he talks about shalom as the ultimate goal for cities.
Shalom, isn't that like the Hebrew word for peace?
It is, but it's more than just the absence of conflict. It's like this idea of wholeness, of everything being in right relationship.
Yeah, makes sense.
And Greenway argues that achieving shalom in cities requires this holistic approach.
So not just preaching and converting people.
Right. It's about addressing all the different needs,
Mhm.
spiritual, social, environmental.
And he also emphasizes the importance of planting churches within every people group in the city so everyone can hear the message in their own language and cultural context.
Yeah, making sure everyone feels included. And he talks about the responsibility to care for the environment.
Which is so important in cities with all the pollution and environmental degradation.
Totally. And then, of course, he emphasizes the importance of prayer. He quotes this verse that says, "Seek the shalom of the city and pray for it."
That's beautiful.
And finally, Greenway offers this really inspiring vision of the New Jerusalem.
The New Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's this concept from the Bible, like a perfect city in the future.
Yeah.
And he suggests that this vision should give us hope and motivate us to work for positive change in our cities today.
It's like this reminder that our efforts are part of something bigger, something that will ultimately be redeemed.
Exactly. It's interesting to think about how, the Bible starts with a garden and ends with a city.
Huh, I never thought about it like that.
So for anyone who wants to engage more deeply with urban communities, Greenway offers some practical steps.
Okay, what are they?
First, cultivate your own spiritual life.
So start with yourself.
Yeah. Then get involved in some form of urban ministry or service.
Get your hands dirty, so to speak.
Right. Third, learn more about the complexities of urban ministry and the needs of different people groups.
So educate yourself.
Exactly. Fourth, really get to know a specific city and a specific neighborhood.
Don't just look at cities from a distance. Immerse yourself in one.
Right. And finally, pray for cities around the world.
Pray for their shalom.
Yes. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that the rise of cities has been one of the most significant developments in human history.
Absolutely. And cities present both incredible challenges and incredible opportunities for, anyone who wants to understand the world and make a difference.
And Greenway's perspective, while coming from a particular viewpoint, offers a lot of valuable insights into those challenges and opportunities.
Sure. He makes you think about cities in a whole new way.
He does. And he leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. If the ultimate destination is this perfect city, what does that say about the potential of the cities we live in today?
It's a great question. Like, how can we work towards that vision, even in the midst of all the messiness and brokenness of our current cities?
Exactly. It's something to ponder.
Hmm.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new ways of thinking about the incredible, ever-evolving world of cities.
My pleasure. It's been a fascinating conversation.